Kinnett is an investigative columnist for the Daily Signal, and one of our favorite guests, Steve Laffey, is a former presidential candidate, and we welcome them both to the broadcast. Let me start with you, Tony, since I think you're new to the platform. What do you predict will be the top domestic priorities for Trump in his first 60 days in office?
How do I phrase this in the most professional and articulate way? Releasing Tom Homan on the biggest issue that many Americans face, which would be illegal immigration. That's first, that's foremost, that is going to happen.
And what should his first act with the Department of Justice, which everybody seems to be concerned about whether he would be targeting his enemies, which I think is a lot of lunacy, but talk about that.
Well, as far as the Department of Justice is concerned, Trump wants to bring forward Pam Bondi. He also wants to reform how the FBI is currently working with Kash Patel. I think those are things that are going to take a little bit longer than 60 days to really bring to task for the American people. I would certainly love to see him knock those out of the park in the first 60, but he can get started by declassifying a lot of things about, for example, the JFK assassination, some other documents that Americans would like to see released, and perhaps an opening investigation brought forward about the collusion between the FBI and social media platforms in 2020.
Steve Laffey, many Americans are concerned about the economy. We keep talking about the tremendous job numbers and how this economy continues to chug along, but people don't see it in their everyday lives. What is it he needs to do as it relates to the financial challenges of everyday Americans?
Well, the number one thing is to get inflation down to zero. And he should start by asking for Powell's, the head of the Federal Reserve's, resignation. He should also then go forward with all kinds of deregulation, which he will do. And he should also go forward with even making America even more energy independent. He should go forward with any kind of regulation he can to bring prices down, deregulation. I think he will do that. But we've got a giant problem with debt. And if he does not focus on this national debt, which he has never expressed any interest in, although I guess he has a couple people called the Doge people who used to say they were going to cut $1 trillion out of the budget when we only collect about $4.5 trillion. Now they're down to who knows what. So all this stuff will continue to change. The problem with Donald Trump in the first 100 days, does he have his act together to get any legislation that can get passed in the first couple of weeks ready to go? I don't think he does. He never has. And so they'll rely on presidential edicts. They'll go to court. These are the things that won't stand the test of time. The real problem is rising interest rates, even though the Fed has cut short-term interest rates, and the refinancing of the United States debt. The reason that so many people feel so badly about an economy that is seemingly expanding is that people in the middle class, the lacking middle class, have lost to inflation. They need 20% more money than when Biden took office. They have 6% more money. So unlike people that you see on TV who don't have to make decisions about what to buy, people walking into grocery stores are saying, I can't buy eggs. What should I do? And if he doesn't address those problems, then his presidency will actually fail.
Tony, how might the president balance his commitments to a populist agenda with practical legislative timelines?
Well, first of all, I would argue that he's doing a far better job as far as legislative priorities are concerned than he did in his first administration, because if you recall, this time during the last Trump getting ready to head into that first administration, he was just now getting around to picking nominees that he was going to put forward for the agency heads. We're well into that now. Trump does have a list of legislative priorities that he's bringing forward and negotiating with Johnson in this thin majority. But I would say that to answer your question, Armstrong, specifically, what we need to see is a deregulation festival, so that all of these agencies that have been jacking up costs everywhere from medicines to the grocery stores over all kind of nonsensical anti-free trade nonsense that's just, I mean, I can't sell eggs in my own town without 800 licenses. That kind of thing needs to stop. That kind of thing needs to be released so there can be free trade that does bring prices down. And that kind of deregulation does have long-lasting effects beyond just Trump's term in office.
You know, it's fascinating, Steve, that Donald Trump announced that probably on his first day he may issue 100 executive orders. I mean, what kind of role will that play in advancing his domestic policy goals?
Probably a very small role. We need people to go and get ready to pass legislation. I'll give you an example. I mean, we don't need, and the American people agree. Pew Research just came out with a complete feelings of the American public. We need massive economic reform. And it could start with a flat tax, replacing the tax system, a fair tax, or a Herman Cain 999 plan, but something that the president takes to the country and says, we have to do this. Instead, I think they're going to go for some more tax cuts to take more people off the tax rolls. None of this will help the bond market, which is actually voting. The bond market is voting in the United Kingdom, it's voting in America, and it's making mortgage rates more expensive, and it's making people's expenses for small businesses go up. And if that problem is not dealt with by some real national leadership, then we are going to have a very tough 2025.
Hold that point. Don't go away. We'll be back with much more. Steve Laffey, what does the president need to do to set a moral agenda that ethics, character, integrity, and honor matters?
That's a tough one, Armstrong, since you're talking about a person who doesn't have much ethics or many morals. So I don't know what he should do on that regard. He's only appointing the richest people and the sycophants that love him to offices like he did before. I don't think he'll do anything about that. I think that it's a void. It's a void in our country. It's a void among our elected officials. And it may simply be a reflection of where America stands morally today.
Tony, what challenges might Trump face from Congress in implementing his domestic agenda, especially with a definitely divided legislature?
The biggest challenges that he's going to face is a very thin majority. This thin majority that comprises of individuals from various parts of the Republican Party, such as more establishmentarian Republicans, as opposed to more populist or traditional conservative, or even like Thomas Massie, heavily libertarian-leaning Republicans. The answer to this, that the challenge Trump clearly faces, is using DOGE as it was used during the continuing resolution, which is pressuring congressmen to stop making these shady backroom deals that the majority of American people aren't a fan of, and pushing more single-line issue bills, even if it's not as perfect as we want it to be, a lot better than perhaps what has been done over the last decade and a half. And that's really what Americans are looking for, less theater about what this magical vision of what Washington should be, and just doing some actionable work for Americans.
Steve, can he end the conflict in Ukraine? Can he bring some reasonableness to the Middle East with Israel and the threats from Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, ISIS, Al-Qaeda?
Yes, he can do both on this. I mean, of course, Donald Trump campaigned on ending the Ukraine war in 24 hours. I think now it's at 100 days or 6 months. All these things continue to change. That was never going to happen. But I think Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, has played his cards very well and Putin very badly. So to end the war in Ukraine simply means getting all the allies and the United States to provide whatever is needed immediately and start marching forward. That will end the war in Ukraine. The other thing you can do in Ukraine is simply bother other countries. He's also doing a very good job of bothering Panama. He's doing a very good job in talking about Greenland and national security. These things send messages to other leaders around the world. As far as Israel, President Trump's always done a pretty good job with Israel. We have the Abraham Accords. We need more countries to join. But what is really needed is the complete takeout of Iran's military capabilities. We need Israel, if anybody wants to join them, to take out the oil facilities. We need them to take out all ability to make nuclear weapons, and we need to take out the mullahs who run the country. And then Trump can turn to the rest of the world and say, don't screw with the United States of America. That can be done because Iran is back on its heels. And as we've seen what Israel's been able to do just by itself, they don't stand a chance. And we should now do what we should have done in 1980 and make sure Iran is not heard from again without real pain.
Tony, back here at home, we saw the terrorism in New Orleans during the Sugar Bowl. We're being told by the FBI, adjust yourselves, they're here. They can ignite cells at any time. What is it that the president needs to do to make the homeland more safe and secure, and also to address the rise in juvenile violence and crime and homicides?
Well, two different prescriptions. I would actually agree with my counterpart here that one of the best things to do in removing mass Islamic terrorism from the world is completely demoralizing these group of imbeciles by toppling the Iranian regime. And I'm very in favor of seeing that collapse, which would create a sense of despair, as we saw as all of the other proxies fell like dominoes. They are getting desperate. So I think that releasing the FBI and the CIA to actually doing their jobs, which is to protect against threats on domestic soil, not just made up domestic threats of parents at school board meetings, would be a start. As for the youth crime rate, how about allowing police to do their jobs in major cities instead of throwing them in court every 15 seconds over arresting someone for shoplifting?
Steve, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think all these things are great. And I think what Trump has to do early on is go for the easy victories. An easy victory in the Panama Canal, an easy victory somewhere else. Because for too long, our presidents have always tried to tie, no matter what the situation is, in foreign policy. We need victories to show other world leaders, especially the tyrants in Venezuela, another easy victory. Get rid of them.
Absolutely.
And if we can do that, then China wakes up and says, uh-oh, we're not going into Taiwan. And Putin says, uh-oh, and then someone may depose Putin. A lot of these things can falter very quickly. And he needs easy foreign policy victories. He also needs to carry out, for example, when it comes to illegal immigration, what I would like to finally see happen is that the arrest of people who hire illegal immigrants, not the person at the low level, the CEO of the company that's employing them somewhere in a meatpacking plant, the arrest in handcuffs taken out. Then people say to themselves, I'm not doing that. Easy victories at the beginning will help to larger victories in the end.
Absolutely right.
This is the Armstrong-Williams Show, and we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
And welcome back to the broadcast. Tony, what role does the media need to play in being fair and balanced? We saw what happened where Meta is saying they're not going to no longer use third-party fact checkers on its platforms. They were forced to do things during the Biden era, which made them very uncomfortable, and they're changing that. Talk about the media.
There was an era in this country in which every town had two newspapers, the Republican newspaper and the Democrat newspaper, and everyone was very open about their bias because we're people. And as a columnist, I'm very clear about what my opinions are, and this is good for readers. That means they can check out my story, they can clearly get what are the base facts from the story, and then they can see my opinions. And if the whole media was honest with themselves about this, it would be a lot better of an ecosystem because, again, it creates this sense of urgency to actually investigate the media itself rather than just take the word of a school marm.
Steve Laffey, it's one thing to campaign, it's another thing to govern. And it does seem that so many Americans, shockingly, just has such great hope for this second term of Donald Trump. Look at the impact he's already having with Canada and other places around the world. I mean, even the massive people coming on the border, there's barely a notice of it now. So how can Donald Trump take his earlier years as president and also the trust that people have in him and also this bravado of strength and courage and fight, and push an agenda that will really create an incredible legacy for him after 4 years in office?
Yes, and he will have a big legacy, whether it's economic nationalism, the thought that he's ahead of deglobalization, which is happening anyway, energy independence, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that he'll go down in history for during the second term if he makes it through the 4 years. But the other thing, if he really wants to be in the history books, and if you could watch the show, please listen, he needs to solve one at least gigantic problem that affects the deficit. I'll give you an example. If he could fix Social Security, and I mean fix it, and tell people it's going to cost more, because it's not 1890, we're not going to have it. But we old people have been taken from young people for too long, and then a plan, I have them on my website, stevelaffey.com, other people have plans. Here's what we're going to do, and get it so that young people actually believe they're going to get it. That will improve the ability of young people 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to say to themselves, I'm really going to get a good check. It's in the private sector. It's not being held by the federal government. It's not going to my grandparents. And I'm actually going to get it. And I own it. If he could do something like that to take the $65 trillion in unfunded liabilities to zero, on its way to zero, I'm strong. The dollar would stay strong. People would believe in America. And then he could be on to something else. He could also do it with health care. I mean, he needs to say, listen, American citizens, you're not paying one dime more for any of these drugs that anybody in any other country pays. We're not funding Germany. We're not funding Italy. Here's what we're doing. People could pass that law, and guess what? Pharmaceutical prices go down. Prices go down. Stuff like that are big, and they need to be done, Armstrong. They need to be done now.
Tony, what about the rise in healthcare costs, frivolous lawsuits, overpricing of drugs, of gouging Americans? How can we get this under control?
Step number one, absolutely deregulate 175% of everything. There is no reason that state insurance companies, the federal insurance companies, need to be tied behind the back, and then also the medical production and the medical trade, and then not to mention the regulation of individuals working in the industry and the licensing part of the industry and the maintenance of the hospitals and all of these other regulations that basically allow these backroom payments to the government 14 different times before the individual actually receives the care that they're trying to purchase. Again, this is why when you look at the eye care industry, prices are continuing to go down over there, but in the medical industry, prices are continuing to go up. Regulation plays the ultimate role. So getting rid of all of those, yeah, that's going to be a huge, huge step forward. And we just have to be willing to ignore all of the fear-mongering over becoming a third world country overnight if, God forbid, someone has to do a little bit of research before they buy their medication.
So you also believe that the president should take on the Great Society programs to reduce waste and abuse, and also to start a real effort to reduce the deficit?
I think that he should, in as far as the first is concerned with getting rid of federal programs. As much as I desperately want Donald Trump to scrap Social Security as well as the massive deficit programs, it's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream with this Republican Congress we currently have. That's not done by the president. That's done by Americans getting involved in their primaries. That's the goal. So as much as I'd love Donald Trump to just wipe away Social Security, it ain't happening, Captain.
And we'll be back with some final thoughts.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Steve, we're always talking about what the president and the legislative branch and the court should do. What is it the people we need to do to make our government and give our leaders an opportunity to make real changes for the lasting of our democracy and prosperity?
Well, we, the people, need to pay attention. When I go around this country, I see lack of people paying attention. On planes, I don't see people doing anything but playing video games rather than reading newspapers. As my colleague here has pointed out, in a sense, that people, we need to get back to that. And the president can be a leader for that, of putting out good information. But right now, people suffer from this 10-second news cycle, unlike a show like this where we're getting down into it. And it's really been detrimental to us to accomplish large things and solve big problems. The president can be the leader on this. And yet I fear that Donald Trump, all the things we talked about, many won't happen because of his disease called narcissism. But the people of America need to educate their children better. They need to get them out of public schools or whatever they can. And they need to go back to a time where one parent stayed home and one went to work. And if we don't do that, then we're lost, and we won't get it back, Armstrong.
Tony, what do you see, in less than a minute, the biggest threat to his agenda?
The biggest threat to Donald Trump's agenda is I would argue, the federal court system. I don't mean as a threat needs to be removed, but what I expect is a bunch of court decisions trying to stymie deregulation and also laws that are passed on small semantic issues. As far as a larger threat, I do agree with the disinterest of the American public, but that's not something that, again, Trump is going to be able to solve with a flick of the wand. That's a deeper issue in society. A deeper issue.
Tony Kinnett, Steve Laffey, WJLA 24/7. Thank you so much for another wonderful broadcast, a very educational one. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and root for your favorite team. I'm Armstrong Williams.
Thanks, Armstrong.
Thank you.
Thank you.